says this: Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
Carry on from verse 15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you in advance. So if anyone tells you, "There he is, out in the desert," do not go out. Or, "Here he is, in the inner rooms," do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there will be vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give it light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken.
Okay, I'll just continue from that point. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs become tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, and not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving up in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in a field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Understand this: if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. This is a large, big chapter, a big subject. So one wonders how we're going to summarize it. I'm going to try and do that in its context and think about what it tells us about the coming of Jesus. Now, in the spring of 1982, a full-page advert appeared in major newspapers right around the world. Full page, when the Times was a big broadsheet and Telegraph big broadsheet. A full page in lots of different newspapers. And the advert, it simply said, "The Christ is now here." Over the ensuing weeks, more appeared with some little details about the Christ and the blessing he would bring and the peace he would give. And I remember the discussions on radio and TV. Well, what do you think about this? Is this real? Is it possible? Is it good? Is it true? Should we believe this person when he finally appears? Well, the series of ads continued until about May 1982, so just 3 or 4 months probably. And it was a Scottish man called Benjamin Creme who'd put them there. He was an artist, and he had all sorts of, you might call esoteric interests in the spiritually strange. And he called this press conference, and it took place in Los Angeles in May 1982. There were 90 journalists there expecting some huge revelation to be given. Well, I think it was a bit of a letdown, because he claimed that this person was in fact living in the Brick Lane area of East London. And he would reveal himself if they sought him, if they looked for him. Well, the press lost interest after that, because well, there are enough cranks around giving prophecies and predictions that never come true. And this was just one of those vague ramblings on a bizarre subject. Actually, the messages kept going. He kept putting them up every so often for the rest of his life. I think he died about 10 years ago at the ripe old age of about 93 or 4. But nobody really was interested, because it was just too strange. And it wasn't all that special in the end. Some character living in Brick Lane who in the end didn't reveal himself. And I think that probably describes what people think of the coming of Jesus, the return of Jesus. And if you say that you believe in it, people go, really? Can you? Do you? Well, we're not joining the ranks of the crazy prophets. So yes, there are crazy prophets around. Even within Christian circles, and Benjamin Creme certainly wasn't within Christian circles. But we're not joining them. However, we can say, yes, we do believe this. And that's why we want to think about it over the autumn as if you like, as a continuation of a broad theme. Jesus says, I will build my church. And then we've been thinking about the way in which the kingdom parables spoke of what would happen. And then it's kind of logical, isn't it, to think about the king coming back, and he will claim his church, having built it. So we're starting with this huge chapter in Matthew 24. Actually, it's part of a big block of teaching. Matthew's gospel, you can discern 5 big blocks of teaching. One of them is obviously the Sermon on the Mount. We looked at another one, Matthew 13, the parables of the kingdom. And this is another one. In a way, it starts with chapter 23, which is Jesus, where he roundly condemns the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. And then it continues, because perhaps he was doing that. There are teachers all around, there's the temple buildings all around, and the disciples are a bit overawed by this. And so they point out how magnificent these buildings are that the teaching is going on in. And Jesus says, well, actually, do you see this? Not one stone will be left on another. Every stone will be thrown down. He tells them that this is going to happen. And so they ask a follow-on question, which is what sparks the whole series of teaching that follows. And the follow-on question is there in verse 3. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So that's three questions rolled into one, really. The destruction of Jerusalem, the coming of Jesus, and the end of the age. Or perhaps it's hard to know what they understood by the coming of Jesus, because the word that Jesus uses is a word parousia, which we don't use in English, unlike apocalypse, which means the presence of somebody special, that the arrival, and it was used to describe the arrival of royalty. So Jesus, we know, uses it about himself, and the disciples using it here. Perhaps they're not thinking of him going away and coming back. They just want to know, when is it going to be that you are going to be present in all your glory and splendor? People are really going to see you as you are. I think that's probably what they mean. But we know, of course, at this point, but we know that actually Jesus is going to go and then come back. So he uses this word. So they're asking this threefold question. And Jesus, when he answers, he separates the parts. He first of all talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he says that will take place in this generation. So there's all sorts of explanations about what does he mean by this, but the obvious one is that he means this generation, about 30, 40 years in biblical thinking. And that's really the first half. Then he goes on to talk about his coming, we call it his return. And he mentions it several times, but it begins from verse 36, and he says, this will only happen, you don't know when. No one knows the day or the hour. He doesn't put a date on it. So he puts a date on the first thing, a time scale rather, and then on the second thing, he doesn't. No one knows the day or hour. And then the rest of the block of teaching is the parables about the coming of Jesus. So I think that's the way we should look at it. So in effect, the first part isn't directly to do with the return of Jesus. The second part is. But we have to get through the first part, because in a way, this cataclysm that's going to take place is almost a picture of the return of Jesus. So let's see if we can get through it. The first part really goes from verse 4 to 14, is a warning. Watch out that nobody deceives you, because many will come in my name saying, I am the one. The Christ is now here. I am the one. And this is a timeless warning, because there will be false prophets in Jesus' day as there are in ours. There are people out there who are aiming to deceive, and they use the crisis to exploit, to get money quite often, to control, to get power. And they use the name of Jesus to get that power. They come in his name. So I'm the one, I'm the one that you should be thinking about. I'm the one who's going to lead you the right way to Jesus, and there's nobody else. So now I was thinking about this. I don't think there are quite as many apocalyptic cranks around as there used to be. At least we don't seem to encounter them here. But nevertheless, they do exist. Communities that shut themselves off from the world, claiming the end is nigh, and we're going to barricade ourselves in and arm ourselves to the teeth. We don't see that in Britain, of course. That's more of the American version of it. But it's still a warning to us that people will use this to exploit others. And so Jesus, first of all, describes the sort of events that happen in the world generally, that are not necessarily immediately concerned with his return. There's all the things that we experience in the world that cause the anxiety that Lawrence was praying about and the fears that we have in the world. So nations rising against nations, wars and famines and earthquakes. He talks about persecution that we know did actually start quite soon after the church got going after Pentecost. False prophets, people saying, yeah, this is going to happen, and I've got the answer. I'm the one. And, he also then details the fact that involved in this will be the preaching of the gospel to all nations. And in a way, that's a signal for the end itself, when the gospel has been preached to all nations. So we have that as a broad indicator, but we still can't know exactly when that will be. We can't pinpoint it exactly. But the warning is, when you think about all these things, to watch out. And it's probably a good warning. Even you can see its value even in the New Testament. We'll be looking at passages from 1 and 2 Thessalonians. And in those passages, it's quite clear that people have been shaken by various claims that people have made to say, well, the day of the Lord's been and you've missed it, or here's the person you need to be following. So the warning is a valid one, even in scriptural times. We're 2,000 years later, so the warning is as real, that people could make these claims. The impact of these 3 months of adverts that this man put out was quite profound. People were, I don't know how they would respond to it today, it's 40 years ago, but they were quite shaken by this thought that here is Jesus putting adverts in national newspapers, announcing that he's present and he's going to be there. And all the background thoughts that people have about, is Jesus really going to return, sort of came to the surface, and people were shaken by it. And Christians were wondering, is he going to be the real one? Is it going to be real? Well, as it turns out, complete fake. But nevertheless, Christians were shaken by it. And so we need to be on our guard. That's the point. Then he moves to the teaching about Jerusalem being destroyed from verse 15 to 35. Now, this was a big subject for the disciples, obviously, because Jerusalem and the temple was their home. It was the heart of their beliefs and the religious system that they'd grown up with and all their traditions. So it's obviously a big subject. And the idea that it could be destroyed and wiped away, that must mean that the end is coming. You can see the logic in their minds. So they needed to know something about it. So he speaks of, in verse 15, the abomination that causes desolation, and then goes on to talk from that. That's a phrase that describes an event that had taken place 200 years previously, approximately, when the Syrians invaded and desecrated the temple under a man called Antiochus Epiphanes. They sacrificed pigs in the sanctuary, among other things that they did. And what's interesting, that phrase itself, though, describing that event, was first of all used by Daniel several hundred years before that. He speaks about the abomination that causes desolation, of an utter desolating experience. And Jesus is saying that this is going to happen again. And it did. It happened in AD 70, when the Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem and its temple and most of the Jewish nation as well, because the Jews were fed up of being under Roman control, were waiting for Messiah to set us free from the Romans, so they rebelled, and the Romans dealt with it brutally. So Jesus says this is going to happen again. And he's telling his readers that at that time, this is the destruction of Jerusalem, and you need to get out as fast as you can. Don't hang around. Those words that are there from verse 15, flee to the mountains, don't go back for anything. It will be terrible if this is in winter. because you'll need to run. You need to get away. Don't hang around. Don't listen to those who say that the Messiah has come, that he's going to rescue us at the last point from this, which is what people were saying when it came. Don't believe them, because he won't be there, whether he's out in the desert or somewhere in some inner room somewhere. He won't be there. And Jesus is saying basically that these events, however cataclysmic they are not the signal for my return. The coming of the Son of Man will be much, much more obvious than that. That's why he talks in verse 27 about the lightning. As the lightning comes from the east, is visible even in the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. That it will be that obvious. It's not the destruction of the city. It's something quite different. Like lightning in the sky, visible, sudden, and obvious to all. And this destruction will not be it. That strange phrase in verse 28, you might think, well, what is that about? Wherever there's a carcass, there the vultures gather. I think it's just another way of saying that it's obvious. You know, we don't experience it because we don't have vultures in here. But anywhere, any country where there are vultures, well, you will know, once they start circling and landing, you know what's going on. It's obvious there's a carcass down there and it's dinner time. And I think that's just what the point is. You see something like that, it's obvious. You know what's happening. Well, the coming of the Son of Man will be obvious. There's going to be no doubt about it. It's not going to be hidden away. So everything he says, like this, all of this, he says at the end, verse 34, will take place within this generation. This generation will certainly not pass away before these things happen. Now, biblical generation is about 40 years normally. You take the time of Jesus, about 30 AD, and you add 40 years to it, you get 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem then. Now, you might ask, we've jumped over some controversial but interesting verses, haven't we? You might ask, well, what about verses 29, 30, and 31? Because they look pretty apocalyptic, don't they? Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies be shaken. Now that sounds like the return of Jesus, doesn't it? Well, it does, because that's where our minds are conditioned to think of it in a way. But you notice it does say immediately after the distress of those days, in 70 AD. Well, everything that follows, 29, 30, 31, they are images drawn from the Old Testament, apocalyptic writings in the Old Testament. They're already speaking of things in a poetic, apocalyptic way, things that happened in Old Testament times. So verse 29 is a quotation from Isaiah. And Isaiah, in two places, it's taken from two parts of Isaiah. And the first one refers to the downfall of Babylon. The second part refers to the downfall of Edom. So Isaiah has described the downfall of the city of Babylon and the nation of Edom in this apocalyptic way. The sun darkened, the moon not giving its light, the stars falling. It's a poetic description of the calamity that overcame Babylon. And Jesus has just taken it and lifted it and put it as a description of the downfall and the calamity, the downfall of Jerusalem. So it's not about his return, it's about the darkness and the sadness and the loss in the downfall of Jerusalem. Likewise, the sign of then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. Now, he's taking a piece from Zechariah there. Zechariah 12. We don't know exactly what the sign is or would be. But Zechariah 12 says, they will look on the one they have pierced, and all the nations of the land will mourn. Or all the tribes of the land. He's talking about Israel's response, mourning at the crucifixion of Jesus. And he's just taken that quote, that is there in verse 30, lifted it and describe the response in some way when the calamity of Jerusalem takes place. People mourn, actually, because it points to the fact that Jesus is the one they should be following. And they've turned their back on him and turned away from him. So they will mourn. And then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. That's a quotation from Daniel chapter 7. So in Daniel chapter 7, you have a statement where Daniel sees this vision of one like a son of man being exalted to heaven itself, to the throne of heaven. And he comes on the clouds and the glory of heaven itself. And he's acclaimed as the Lord of all. Now, it's an Old Testament picture of the exaltation of Jesus. And Jesus quotes from it there and says, people will understand this perhaps in a way. The destruction of Jerusalem will make them realize actually that he'd prophesied this and he's the one they should be trusting in. So the coming on of Jesus in power and great glory isn't actually his return. It's not the same word. It's not the word coming, the parousia. It's him being exalted to heaven and ascended to heaven itself. Verse 31, the angels gathering, the elect from the four winds. You know, I personally take that in view of the way that all these are linked to the destruction of Jerusalem. I take that to be the preaching of the gospel and the gathering of his people around the world. Now, I appreciate you. That's a lot to take in. You may not grasp it. You may not agree with it. But it does appear to me that what Jesus is talking about is this massive cataclysmic event of the destruction of Jerusalem and almost the end of the Jewish nation at that time, and describing it for them because they want to know, when are you going to come? And he's not going to stop that happening. So that's his first part of his answer. And then he goes on to talk about his return. So I hope we've in some way thought about the way those verses are to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. And then he returns sometime later. Now, I thought I'd ask Google AI, because you now get Google AI, about if it knew the date of Jesus' return. This is the reply I got. It's impossible to calculate the exact date of Jesus' return because the Bible states that no one knows the date or hour, not even Jesus himself. Okay. Well, you know that AI just reads from lots of documents, and I think evangelicals are putting a lot of documents out about the return of Jesus. So AI says, no, you can't know that. It can't be anything other than sudden or unexpected. And what follows, Jesus uses several illustrations to show it, to show that this is the case. So he talks about life going on as normal in the days of Noah until suddenly the flood came that sweeps them away. He talks about 2 men and 2 women, one of each taken and one left behind. He talks about the owner of the house, whose house is broken into, who doesn't know when the thief's going to come and so isn't prepared for the thief when he breaks through. He talks about, in verse 48, about the lazy servant. You have the good servant who's well prepared, but the lazy servant, in verse 48, who's not. And the master comes home earlier than expected and catches him drunk and misbehaving. And then you have chapter 25, the 5 foolish bridesmaids. No, the 5 foolish, there's 10 of them, 5 foolish. The bridegroom takes longer than expected, and they're caught unawares. Actually, you've got the two problems we have with it there, don't you? You've got one is that he returns sooner than expected. We're not ready. The other one is he takes longer than expected, and we're not ready. And in all of these, the thought is that you simply don't know the day or the hour, but you do know what's going to happen. Jesus will arrive suddenly, and that we will be taken to be with him. That's one of the pictures you have here of people being taken to be with him. There's more detail about that in 1 Thessalonians 4, which we'll do in a few weeks' time. But the basic reassurance is that Jesus returns suddenly, unannounced, well, the timing of it unannounced anyway, and takes us to be with him. And that is the end of the age. And actually, if you think about it, that's what we want, isn't it? That's what we want. We want the end to the tragedies of our world. You think the cataclysm of Jerusalem being destroyed is a pattern that's repeated down the ages. And we're witnessing it in several places now. Of course, we see them more closely on our television screens. So the end to the tragedies of the world is what we want, and to be with Jesus. This is the thing that sustains us, and this is the heart of it, that he's going to return, and we will be with him. And in a way, everything else is secondary to that. There's all sorts of things that we're going to talk about because the Bible talks about them. But everything else is secondary. That does mean we're not going to entertain the schemes that are proposed for the way in which this will take place. You know, there's a series of books that I've read all of I forget what they call the taken away books. Now, sorry? The Left Behind. Yeah, thank you. Left Behind, taken away. Well, I've read them all, and I don't agree with the theology that it starts with, that there's going to be this secret arrival of Jesus. He's going to take away all the believers, and there'll be 7 years of tribulation, and then he's going to return again to end the world. So that's, we're not going to go down that line at all. We're not going to speculate about dates. It's surprising how often Christians do it. We worked it out. We've done all the maths in Daniel, and that tells us. Listen again, actually, to the wisdom of AI. The Bible does mention signs of the end times, but focusing on these is more about being prepared than pinpointing a date. It did say some things I haven't put in that I disagree with. I thought, no, that's not quite right. But I think that's really the way it is. Focusing on these signs is more about being prepared than pinpointing the date. You see, and I think it gives an indication of what we're to do with this piece of information. It's not about working out exactly when it's going to happen, because, of course, we don't know whether we are going to live long enough to this point, whether we die first and see him face to face then, or whether we're ready to meet him in the air. But either way, it calls us to be ready. It's what Jesus talks about when he says, keep watch. Keep watch there in verse 42, and also at the end of the parable of the bridesmaids in verse 25, verse 13. The bridesmaids in the parable fell asleep, and some weren't ready. They were caught unawares because the bridegroom was delayed. They hadn't kept watch. None of them had, as it happened. It just so happened that the wise ones had done the prep beforehand. And the next parable afterwards, in chapter 25, there's a parable about servants with their talents. And it shows us that it's not about passively waiting for the heavens to open or going up onto a mountaintop to think, well, Jesus is going to return and this is the highest point, so we'll be closer to him when he comes back. It's not about doing anything like that. It's about serving him and using the talents that he's given you. That's what that parable about is out from verse 14 of chapter 25. Called in the NIV, new one, it's called the parable of the bags of gold rather than the talents, but it's about using what we have. We keep ourselves ready by serving, by keeping a focus on him. It's the everyday disciplines of Christian life: trusting, serving, praying, loving, believing, working. It's not about scanning the heavens or looking for signs. It's about serving and living for him where he's placed us. There are probably several ways you can think about this in terms of modern living. Modern soldiers, they're constantly training, and certain regiments have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. They have to be ready in 24 hours. We don't get that much when it comes to the return of Jesus. Or perhaps it's a bit the way that in the recent fires on the North York moors, people who were living there were told to pack a bag with all the essentials that they would need if they had to leave at a moment's notice. They would have to take it and run if the fire came too close. They carried on their daily lives, basically, as normally as possible, but they were in a constant state of readiness to leave if necessary. Well, in a way, that's what our Christian lives are about. We're keeping ourselves aware of the Lord's presence and his love. We're serving him. We're seeking to reach out for him. We're maintaining the basic Christian life, knowing that he could come at any moment. And that's where Google's made the good point. The AI has made a good point that Jesus is coming. You don't know when. So just forget about the dates. Just make sure you're ready for it when it comes. Now, one of the ways in which we do that, I said, is that we maintain the Christian life and we serve and seek to grow in faith. And the song we're going to sing now does, in fact, put that into words, that we want God to purify our hearts so that we are ready to do his will.